As I think everybody here probably knows by now, I'm Matt Kloppenstein, and I work with graduate students and prospective graduate students, and I'm the point person for the National Fellowships Office for the NSF GRFP. And this is our final workshop in our summer series, taking a look at the different parts of the application process. I'll say a few words towards the end about the time we'll be holding for some virtual accountability and work on Tuesday evenings for the remaining weeks prior to the start of classes here. But this is the last of our specific workshops unpacking this particular um, aspect of the application. And if you've not been able to attend previous ones, recordings are available. They're linked in the Teams group, along with slides and any other associated materials. For tonight, though, as we look at the research statement, we're going to focus on a couple things here that I want to just provide you a quick overview of what's to come. So we'll take a look at the prompt for the research statement, make sure you have a sense of the exact language that you're going to encounter from NSF. As we did with the personal statement last week, we will take a look at some key pieces of advice, some high-level things to keep in mind as you approach this here. We'll spend a little bit more time with outlining than we did last week because I think there are a number of differences that are going to be somewhat discipline specific. And in this case, I think that it's important to kind of think through a little bit more about what it is that you're trying to accomplish with the different sections of describing the research there. So we'll do that. And then we'll also unpack a little bit an excerpt from a successful proposal as a way to try to illustrate some of the points that I'm going to be emphasizing here in our time this evening. And my hope is that as a result of this, you'll have a clear understanding of what the research statement is meant to accomplish and the different parts of it there. That if you have not yet begun to do some work preparing for this, that you will be ready to begin at least outlining and developing some ideas here, and that you will be able to recognize some of the key features of a successful statement. With the research statement, I do recognize that this one sometimes takes a little bit longer to necessarily start on or potentially to start on. You may be doing a summer research experience right now. You may be collaborating with a faculty member who's going to provide some support with all of this. And so, whereas the personal statement is relatively, I think, okay to go ahead and start at any point if you're considering applying for the GRFP. I recognize that for some of you, you may not be in a position where you feel like you're quite ready to dive into this. So whether you've started work on this or not, or you plan to do so in the next couple of weeks, I do think it's useful to at least have an outline by the end of the summer that you can start building around. And I hope that this session will be helpful in framing this here. I'm not going to go over much of this because, again, I think everyone here has been to a previous workshop here. I do want to flag a couple details, though, because earlier this week we did get the updated solicitation for the next competition cycle. You should have received an email where I outlined some of the takeaways from that and sent a copy of that. That information has been uploaded into the Microsoft Teams group as well. And whether you've read the email or not, or saw that or not, I encourage everyone to read over the solicitation themselves. Again, this is the full explanation from NSF, the full details, the unpacking of the eligibility criteria, the language that we've looked at before around review criteria and those sort of things. So please take some time to look over that because that is really the key document for understanding things here. We do have the deadlines. I definitely want to flag that for everyone. October 15th through 18th. Your specific deadline will depend on the larger field that you will be applying to. So, for example, the 15th is chemistry, geosciences, mathematics, physics, and astronomy. The 17th is engineering. So pay attention to to where your field and subfield is going to fall within that because that will determine your specific deadline. One thing I want to emphasize, because this is a departure from how this has been in previous years, is that this year they're putting a deadline for the letters of recommendation earlier than the application deadline. In the past, it's always been the week after the proposal deadlines. This year, it's a little bit earlier than that. So when you are reaching out to people, as potential recommenders, make sure that they are aware of that deadline, and make sure that they have the information that they need, and you are able to input their contact information in the system well in advance of that deadline, because that is a little bit earlier here. And I want to really emphasize that, because if somebody that you're asking has written letters before, they might not be expecting it to be a little bit earlier than has typically been the case here. Otherwise, the award amounts are the same for this year. And the main other differences are kind of smaller tweaks in language, and I'll mention a couple of them as we touch on some things that are relevant to that. So again, just a reminder of where this statement fits within the larger context of the application. So the personal relevant background and future goals statement, the personal statement that we looked at last week, and then what we're talking about today, the graduate research statement, are the two main written documents. But again, everything that you submit to NSF, including these other items here that I'm listing, are going to be taken into consideration and are going to be part of that holistic review that reviewers are tasked with identifying. So those broader impacts and the intellectual merits that you are seeking to demonstrate to reviewers should be in evidence in all of those other aspects there as well. But just a reminder, and again, full details on letters of recommendation, on requirements for transcripts and information like that is all in the solicitation that was just released at the beginning of the week here. And so I was happy to follow up individually with any questions about that. So let's jump right in and start thinking about the research statement prompt here. I This prompt has been the same for a number of years. At least for me, I don't know if anyone else has tried to log into the portal yet. I was not seeing the new application yet available for this competition cycle in NSF GRFP's online portal here. Last year, this was the case as well, where it didn't open up for a little bit after the solicitation was released. So I was not able to confirm that this language is exactly the same, although I strongly suspect that it will be, because it has not changed for a while here. But I do just want to give that as a little. But this has traditionally been the precise instructions when you log into the portal and create your profile there around the graduate research statement. So they ask you to present an original topic you would like to pursue in graduate school, two-page single-space limit. Describe the research idea, your general approach, any unique resources that may be needed for accomplishing the research goals. You may choose to include important literature citations. Hint, hint, you should definitely do that. And address the potential of the research to advance knowledge and understanding within science, as well as the potential for broader impacts on society. So those two review criteria that we've been talking about over the sessions we've done this summer, intellectual merit and broader impacts. And the research must be in a field listed in the solicitation. So again, if you haven't looked at it yet, the last number of pages is a breakdown of all of the different subfields within the larger categories like chemistry or computer and information sciences and things like that. So this is the language that NSF has typically provided applicants for addressing this prompt here. But as we've done with other parts of the application, we're going to try to think about what this actually means for all of you as you're considering putting something together here. Formatting requirements, again, I just want to emphasize that they are spelled out. This is in the solicitation, and this will also be in the online portal. And these are something that should be followed explicitly. I did note that this time around, they actually had a line saying that for cited references, you should include the name of the journal that the reference is from, although abbreviations are accepted. I don't think this is a huge change before, but they did choose to specify that. So something to keep in mind. And again, I'm happy to talk more about what that could mean for the types of citations, because they can be abbreviated there, but they do want to make sure that that the name of the journal is present. Otherwise, again, the big thing that I want to emphasize is that you need to have that intellectual merit labeled section and that broader impacts labeled section. They must be included. They must be labeled as such. They must be only those labels, as we talked about last week as well. I'll emphasize that again a little bit later. And again, the big point I just want to take away is that NSF can and does reject applications when they are not in the proper formatting here. And I see we have a question in the chat. So, question about citations written in the footnotes. So, will this be on an additional page? So, they will need to appear at the bottom of the page there. You shouldn't put them in as footnotes because that would put them sort of within the margins that are supposed to be there, and they shouldn't be on an additional page. So everything needs to fit within the body text of the two pages with the 1 inch margins. So no header, footer, or footnotes like that. So you can they don't have to be written out necessarily like a standard reference page in terms of, every citation gets its own line. Again, you can abbreviate them somewhat and kind of condense them there. But yeah, that needs to be included within the 2 page requirement here without using any of the footer space and without giving it to a separate page. That's a good question. And please, if anyone else has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as well. So that's some general formatting and sort of the technical details here around the GRFP. The next thing that I want to talk about is, again, some of that high-level perspective on what it is that you're trying to accomplish here, some general advice that is applicable to anyone, regardless of the field that you're in here. And so I always want to come back to thinking about what is the purpose of this particular award, because that needs to shape the approach that you are going to make about or the approach that you are going to take when you're putting together an application. And again, this is an award that is an individual fellowship that's meant to invest in you and your potential as a researcher and as somebody who's going to make a larger impact in your career here. So in the same way that the personal statement was about showing that through your intellectual journey up to this point, the research statement here is a place to show your ability to think like a researcher, your ability to articulate an original idea and to explain the things that will go into carrying it out. And so this is about your ability to formulate and execute original research, something that's significant, that's going to speak to questions that are important to your particular discipline, and are going to be in conversation with the current literature in your field there. And it's something that you could actually carry out as a graduate student as well. Typically, this is the sort of thing you'd be proposing would be something that would fit within sort of whatever the thesis or central research product of your degree is. So it could be a master's thesis, it could be a dissertation, depending on what type of degree program you're looking at. So that's sort of the scope here. This is not like a project that you would just do like in a semester or over a summer. This is a longer term project that would really be the central research that you envision carrying out as part of the graduate degree you're planning on applying for here. And I emphasize this because this is not a research grant, as I've mentioned when I meet individually with any of you here. This is not funding that is going to go to buy equipment. This is not something where you're going to be submitting a report to NSF around the specific outcomes of this research here. So while the research you propose should be something that you plan to do in graduate school, you're not held to that. You're not like signing a contract if you're offered this fellowship that says you're going to carry this out exactly as proposed. Your research could change. You could take different directions. Some of the things you address, maybe you end up not doing that, or you bring in some other elements or things as part of that. That's okay. Again, this is an individual fellowship. It's about investing in your potential, but it's really a space to show that you can think like a researcher. And that's what they're looking for evidence for in this here as well. Related to this, and I touched on this, I think, a little bit last week in a slightly different context, this is also a point where when you're describing the research you intend on doing, you should make clear like what your role is going to be as part of this. Again, depending on your field, you may be in an environment where you're working with a team or you're working as part of a larger lab. You may be working on a project that is in some way related to larger project that the faculty member that you're studying under is doing here. And it's oftentimes the norm to write in this language about we or the lab or sort of passive constructions that don't put the attention on one individual. Because this is an individual fellowship, because it's about demonstrating your potential, you want to make sure that what you are actually going to be doing in the research you're proposing is made clear here. So I'm not saying that you can't use we or you can't reference the fact that you're working as part of a larger group here. That's fine, but you really want to make sure that whoever is reviewing this has a clear sense of what it is that you are actually going to be doing, and that you make it clear, that you have the ability to carry out those particular roles there. So those are a few um, general pieces of advice that I think are really important to keep in mind in terms of the overall purpose of what this statement is trying to accomplish within the context of the larger application. Something else that I want to say a few more words about that, depending on your field, can be a little bit of a gray area, is thinking about the type of research that's eligible here. This is something we talked about with the review criteria, but NSF's mission is all about basic science, and this is what intellectual merit is about as well. How is this adding to knowledge within a particular field? Again, not that the research can't have practical applications, that might result in things that address particular issues or have policy relevance or commercial potential or anything like that. But that is a secondary feature. The main thing that you need to establish first is how this is contributing to something that is fundamental research within your area here. And something related to this that again can be kind of a little ambiguous is that NSF emphasizes that this is not for health outcomes focused or clinical work here. Um, I will stress that this is, again, a little bit of a gray area depending on your field and depending on the nature of the specific project can have an impact on whether or not you might be eligible here. I pulled this paragraph because this was something new that the NSF added in the solicitation this year. I don't think it fundamentally changes what they've been saying before, but I did note that they specifically added in a bullet point addressing biological and psychological research, where in the past they tended to use this research or this language in more general senses without designating those two particular fields of study here. And so again, this is language directly from the newest citation here. It says that research for which the goals are directly human disease or health related are not eligible. Specifically says physical, mental disease, with limited exceptions for engineering and other health related topics where the focus is really on where that research is making a contribution to engineering or computing that happens to be related to working with health focused topics here. I will say that I think it's at least been somewhat unclear to me exactly where NSF draws the line, particularly if your field is like psychology, because NSF has consistently given awards for people in clinical psychology programs. And I've gone back and looked through some of the biographies of recent winners, at least in their institutional profiles, and looked at the projects that they're working on. And it's not entirely clear to me where they're drawing that line, because it seems like in some cases they are supporting students who are doing work that is in health related aspects there. But really the thing that I would emphasize for anybody in that situation is that you really need to make clear what that basic science contribution is going to be. That the research can't be framed primarily in terms of how this is going to lead to some outcome that will improve health or exist primarily for the purpose of knowledge that is going to further some sort of applied health outcome there. And the best piece of advice that I would give at this point is that I would recommend you look in NSF's award search database to see how they have funded previous awards. So this is everything NSF has funded. Unfortunately, they don't provide individual abstracts for every graduate research fellowship recipient, but you can find other awards, including awards for faculty members. And so if you go to that link there, the award search, and you select standard grant and fellowship under award instruments and type in some keywords, you can see previously funded projects, and for them, you should be able to see an abstract for that project. And for the most part, those abstracts will provide language that will speak to both the broader impacts and the intellectual merit component of it. And so my advice would be, see if you can find anything that is somewhat similar in terms of topic or general area or subfield or methodology, to what you're doing and see how those applicants described their work in that abstract there, because that will give you some idea about how that research was presented to the National Science Foundation. And so if you were in a situation where you're not entirely sure where your research fits there, that would be I think the most useful thing that you could do, because all of those would be awards that have been deemed eligible for NSF. And again, I would encourage you to talk with members of our faculty committee and mentors of yours as well to sort of think through some of those particular issues here. But again, this is somewhat of a gray area depending on your field, particularly if it's biological sciences that have had sort of a health connection, or if you're in certain fields of psychology in particular, this is an issue that sometimes comes up. And I'm sorry that I can't give you an absolute definite answer, but just be aware that this is something to really be thinking carefully about, because NSF does include this kind of language here around eligibility. And you want to make sure that you're not making it seem too much like something that's ineligible and risk having the proposal being returned without review. So back to some other general points here beyond proposing eligible research. Some things to keep in mind for every applicant, even while recognizing that what this looks like will depend a lot depending on the field you're in, is that you're trying to show some field-specific knowledge. Do you understand what research looks like in your particular discipline here? And so, being able to reference some technical details that show that you understand the topic and how to best approach it there. So particular tools, particular research methodologies, things like that. Whatever research looks like in your discipline, this is a chance to sort of know it, or to demonstrate that rather, and not in a way that sort of like didactically says like this is how we do research in this field. We do X, Y, and Z, but rather talking about it in a way that sounds confident and knowledgeable, that shows that you are in that space and you just sort of know what that looks like there. And I like to make this point that one of our faculty committee members, Dr. Tammy Richardson, made in a workshop of ours a couple of years ago, is that this is a section that you want to write like a scientist, not like a poet. So this is her advice is this is different than the personal statement here. This is not really a document where you're going to be trying to demonstrate your literary flair here. This is not a mystery novel where you're going to be revealing the significance at the very end, and trying to, have a cliffhanger ending here. This is something that is going to be much more standard in its structure according to what that looks like in your particular discipline here. And it's meant to be written with that more of an expert voice, that more sort of discipline-specific approach that you would expect to find like in journal articles in your field here. While NSF does not require you to use citations there, I will strongly recommend that you have references to current literature, because that's a key part of demonstrating the importance and the significance of the project that you're going to be proposing there. Positioning your work with other work to say, X and Y has demonstrated this, but we still don't know this. That helps build the case for why your research is important there. Because of the length of this, you can't be exhaustive. You're not going to be able to cite, 40 studies or something as evidence there. But citing relevant literature, citing sort of key pieces of work that demonstrate that what has been done in a particular field is another really important thing to show that the research you're proposing is not just something that might be of personal interest to you, but is of larger significance to other experts in the field. Just like with the personal statement, I think that using some strategic bold or underlined text can be really effective in putting things together as well. Again, helping to draw the reader's eye to key statements, say, a bolded objective or hypothesis, an underlined specific aim, things like that can really help, again, make sure that key pieces of information stand out. As I cautioned last week, I'll say again, you don't want to go overboard with this. Too much bold, too much underlining, too many different sort of shifts with that can make the document look visually chaotic and can actually be counterproductive. So you want to do this carefully, but again, it can be a helpful strategy, although it is not a requirement. And I've seen successful proposals that have used it and successful proposals that haven't. So that's up to you, but it's something to consider if you have concerned about making sure that the key information that you really want to emphasize is as easy as possible for a reviewer to be able to find. So those are some general pieces of advice for things that I would recommend that you do as part of your research statement here. The next thing I want to do is touch on some common pitfalls that a research proposal can have, that I would encourage you to be on the lookout for, and try to avoid. So one of them has to do with scope. Like I said before, you want a project that basically would be the research, the sort of central research that you're likely to do for whatever degree program that you're applying to there. So, a project that would be potentially sort of the focus of a dissertation for a doctoral program, potentially for a master's thesis if it's a master's program there. So you don't want to propose a project that's too ambitious, because even if it seems brilliant and very promising, reviewers are going to recognize that it's not something you could actually carry out in the scope of your graduate degree. And you don't want it to be too modest, something that would just be done sort of in a relatively short amount of time as well. Um, this is not to say that you can't, if you do have sort of a bigger research agenda for your career, that you can't kind of gesture to that. But, if you do see the work that you're doing in grad school as sort of part of a larger um, project or again, agenda for your career there, think about what it is that you can reasonably accomplish in the scope of your graduate degree and focus on that. Even if maybe you gesture in a personal statement to where you want your research to go longer term, or maybe talk about that a little bit in the conclusion to your research statement there. So that's one of pitfall to avoid, is not having the right sort of scope for the project. Another one is failing to establish significance. A proposal is purely descriptive. Sometimes this takes the form of just sort of jumping right in and describing what it is that you're going to do. You're going to take these particular measurements, you're going to analyze this data, you expect to find these sort of things. You can't do that in a proposal until the reviewer is already convinced that it matters what you're doing there. So it's really important to establish the larger significance of what you want to do. Why does this matter to the discipline? How are you going to be contributing to knowledge? What are you doing that's innovative? Where is there a need for additional research? Once you establish those things, then the reviewer is prepared to understand and appreciate the more specific details about the actual steps you're planning to take in the research. But you've got to do that first part there. Otherwise, they're not really going to care about it. So don't want to be just descriptive. You need to establish that significance, because a proposal, and every part of the proposal, including the research statement, is an argument overall. It's an argument about why you are well suited for this opportunity, why you should be given this award here. And so that's part of what you're doing with the research statement, is trying to show why this research is something that needs to be done, why you are the right person to be able to carry that out, and why this demonstrates your ability to, again, think like a scientist, like a researcher in training here. Not being focused on the basic science contribution, I think hopefully that's clear based on what I was saying previously around sort of eligible fields of research. But again, you don't want to lead with the applied benefits of that research there. You want to start by establishing how this is going to be contribution to knowledge in your field here. Another issue that I see a lot in early drafts, that I would encourage you to be mindful of, is using language that's a little vague around what it is that you're going to be doing. You saying things like, I'm going to explore, or I'm going to investigate. Not that you can never use those words, but if that's all you're saying, that leaves a lot to the imagination and a lot of uncertainty about what it is you're actually going to do. So saying, I'm going to measure this, I'm going to demonstrate this, we will analyze that, like more specific and precise verbs, that help the reviewer actually visualize what it is that you're going to be doing with that research is much more helpful. So you don't want to hide behind sort of ambiguous language, that sort of naturally prompts the reviewer to say, okay, well, how will you explore it? How are you going to investigate it? So again, it's not that you can't use those words. Perfectly fine to have those words appear there, but if that's all that appears and you don't follow that up with more specific descriptions of how you're going to do those things there, then a reviewer is not going to be convinced and not have a clear idea of what this is actually going to work, how this is actually going to work in practice. Focus is another issue that is related to scope in some ways as well. Um, what you want to be presenting should seem like a coherent project. So sometimes there are um, drafts of research proposals where it really feels like what's being proposed is two or three completely separate experiments or projects or ideas there, and it's not clear why they're all together in the same proposal. So you want to make sure that what it is that you're proposing fits together naturally. It's fine that you have two aims or three aims or two parts or, three stages to the study you're proposing. That's perfectly fine. The issue isn't the number, the issue is that relationship. That, if they seem to be so unrelated to each other that you can't figure out why they're all being discussed together, that's an issue there. And you don't want to go overboard as well. If you have so many aims and so many hypotheses, um, then there's that question about, well, is the scope appropriate here? Can you reasonably expect to run, five different studies or something like that in the degree program you have? And that's going to be dependent on the field that you're working in and some of those things there. So I'm not going to give you a hard number and say, this many yes, this many no. Although I would say 2 to 3 is perhaps the most common. Um, but that's just something to think about. And then in terms of the aims or the objectives that you outline in your proposal, another challenge sometimes is that they're totally unrelated. Again, it seems like they're totally different projects, or a different problem that ultimately results in the same issue is if an aim is completely dependent on another one, such that in order to do this thing, it depends on this other thing working out exactly as described. And the problem there is that if one thing goes wrong, then it's not clear how the larger research proceeds. So it's not that you can't have things where, stage one, we do this. After we've done that, we move on to stage two. But you need to be able to write it in a way that leaves some rooms for contingency. It recognizes that things don't always work out. That maybe the proposed thing you wanted to do isn't going to play out exactly the same way. And you want to make sure that the proposal doesn't read like, if that doesn't happen, then everything else falls apart and nothing potentially productive is able to come out of it there. So you want the aims to be related, but not dependent in that way where everything kind of collapses like a house of cards if one thing doesn't go right at one particular stage there. Methodology is always really important as well. You want to be not just asking the right questions, but answering them in the correct way. You might have a great question, you might have an interesting hypothesis, or a really promising objective there. But if the way you're attempting to answer that question isn't likely to provide the kind of data that would really give us confidence in the conclusions that you draw, the reviewer is likely to flag that and say, well, why are you proposing to do this type of study instead of this one over here as well. So this is something where getting that input from somebody in your discipline is really essential. They'll be the ones who can give you that perspective about, are you using the right methods there? But that's something to be mindful of as well. Lack of feasibility really ties in with a number of things that I've said already, but basically, you need to be able to show that this is something that you could carry out. Not that you can sort of, already going into grad school with absolutely everything that you need to be able to do that. Again, you're going to be receiving training and mentorship and support there, but you want to make sure that you can reasonably, in the scope of your grad program, be able to do that. So, being able to point to previous skills and experiences or point to ways in which you've learned techniques before that can help demonstrate that preparation that you'll be able to learn these additional techniques, or that you are going to be working, or you're going to be applying to programs where that you're going to have access to the type of facilities to do this research, and you'll be able to have the kind of support from faculty with the necessary expertise to train you in things there and to guide you in that. Those are all sorts of things that fall under the category of feasibility. This next one, I think, I want to be careful how I word this here because I think this can be a little bit of a stumbling block as well. But in a lot of science fields, the projects you work on as a graduate student are going to fall within the scope of the research agenda of the particular lab that you may be part of. This is likely to be different if you're in, say, a social science field, but if you're in one of those disciplines where you're likely to be doing work in the context of the grant funding of a PI. it's understood that you're going to be doing research that's related to that. However, this is also about demonstrating that you have some ability to think kind of independently here as well. And this is a comment that I've seen sometimes from reviewers too, where sometimes a reviewer will raise a suspicion and say, is any of this the student's idea, or is this just language that's been handed to them by their graduate mentor? Is this just them executing an aspect of somebody else's grants, or is there anything that the student is actually sort of contributing here? So that's what I mean about being too close to the mentor's project. Not that, you have to say, I'm working on a totally different study system than my mentor or whatever, because, that might be the research that the lab you're in is doing. But it shouldn't just seem like this is only something that's been handed to you without any kind of conversation, or that this is sort of you, again, just executing one aspect of another project without any sort of intellectual input from you there. So again, I don't want to say too much about that because it is kind of field specific there. But again, because this is an issue that is sometimes raised by reviewers, again, thinking back to the purpose of this statement here to show your ability to formulate original research, it's useful to keep that in mind. And the last point that I emphasized last week with the personal statement is true of this as well. Do not mislabel the sections. As I told you last week, that had an issue with an applicant last year whose proposal was rejected because they added some additional language to intellectual merits and broader impacts. So don't add anything else. Don't call it intellectual merit and research experience or broader impacts and outreach or something like that. Just intellectual merit, just broader impact. That's the language that NSF wants you to use. Don't get the proposal rejected for a small technicality like that. So those are some common pitfalls here that I would encourage everyone to be mindful of, in addition to the general pieces of advice that I've emphasized before. With all of those things in mind, I want to sort of pull that all together and think about what is the big picture goal about what you are trying to accomplish as part of this document here. So what is it that this statement is trying to demonstrate? And I've touched on aspects of this already, but just to pull it all together here, the research statement is a chance to demonstrate your ability to formulate significant, original, and feasible research projects. So to break that down even more for each of those terms, significant, what's the intellectual issue? What's the basic science? How is this advancing knowledge in our discipline? But also, where are there potential for broader impact type activities or outcomes as a result of that research as well? Significance first and foremost, intellectually, scientifically in terms of the knowledge there, but also how is there a broader impact potential? And as we talked about in the very first workshop, that can look like a lot of different things, but it's something to be thought about as well. Original, how is this addressing a significant question? How is new knowledge going to be created here? And again, to go off of the point that I was making a minute ago here, this is about showing your ability to contribute to research, not just that you're going to be doing someone else's research. Because again, this is about investing in your potential to think like a scientist. And while in many cases you may be working with faculty members to come up with a project here, that's certainly fine. And I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be doing that at all. Or you may be in contact with a potential mentor at another institution if you're going to be applying to graduate school elsewhere and you're not a current graduate student here. Again, perfectly fine to be in conversation with them and be thinking about, okay, what would be a project I could work on if I came here? That's all great. You just want to make sure that it's clear that this is something that you are going to be doing as well. That it's not just something that someone else is sort of dictating for you to do. And then feasibility means a number of things, but basically, how can we be confident that you could accomplish this research within the context in which it would be done. And that can mean the institutional context, that can mean the time frame, that can mean the skill set that's required. This is where, if we went back to the very beginning with that language that NSF gives in the guidance here, why they ask about things like, are you going to need access, to particular locations? You're going to have to go somewhere to do field work. Are you going to need to, conduct certain measurements at a national laboratory or things like that here. So that feasibility, the resources, the mentorship, the skills, the things that are going to be required in order to actually carry out the great idea that you're proposing that's going to be significant, and that, is going to be something that will make a real impact in your field here. Okay, so let me double check and see. I don't see any of our peer mentors here at the moment, although if someone joins, definitely give them a chance to speak here, but I will just go ahead and jump into the next part where we're thinking about outlining. And so research looks different in different disciplines. There are a lot of different fields that NSF supports here. And so I have here two suggestions from some useful resources. Alex Lang's website, which I mentioned before, and Mallory Ladd, another great resource for that for STEM. And then I have a suggestion for social science as well, about how you might choose to organize the statement, your two-page statement, depending on how you do research in your field and depending on how you would like to organize things there. So an introduction, where you establish the significance of the project, sort of what's the larger issue, why does it matter, a little bit about the literature there, and then, some kind of description of the research. You might have a section that's specifically around objectives and hypotheses, or that might be embedded within a particular research plan. If you have preliminary results, depending on your field, depending on your project, that can be useful to mention. Something that sort of gives reason to think that the ideas you have are promising. If there's any sort of field work that you might be doing, if you're going to have to go and collect samples somewhere, or if you're in a social science field like anthropology or something, where you may be conducting work in a particular location, having some description of what that's going to look like, where you anticipate that work taking place there. And again, this will depend somewhat on discipline, but then definitely labeled sections for intellectual merit and then for broader impacts. You might have a sort of conclusion beyond that, that talks about, kind of ties everything together, or you might just kind of end with the broader impacts and use that as to sort of look at bigger picture about where things are going to go as part of this. These are not things that you have to follow exactly like this. This is just a suggestion of some different things to keep in mind about how you might want to structure that. I always emphasize at this point, though, that you should follow what makes sense based on your particular field, because the way that you do research in microbiology is not the same way that you do it in chemical engineering, and all of that's going to be very different from political science. So follow the lead for what makes sense in your discipline, but just be aware that there are different approaches that you could take to kind of outline things. For social sciences, again, that tends to look a little bit different as well. Oftentimes that's going to mean a little bit more background and description around things there, because you may need to provide not just sort of questions around issues in the literature, but oftentimes social science research is going to explore those questions within a particular context. So, maybe there's a larger issue within the field of economics, but you're choosing to explore it within the context of healthcare or something. And so you might need to provide some background around, what's going on within that particular field of study where you're going to be exploring that with regard to the literature. And some careful attention to methodology is going to be important as well, in those type of fields here. So again, just as suggestions, but I recognize that there are a wide range of fields that are eligible for NSF, and that not all of this is going to apply equally to every field there. And so, if I'm saying something here that's different from what you're hearing from faculty you're working with, definitely follow the advice of the discipline experts, because they're the ones who know what to expect when they see these sort of things within their own fields here. I do want to talk, though, about what I like to call a conceptual outline for how to go about structuring a proposal here. So this is not a list of or an outline in the sense of you have to write it exactly in this order with these particular sections here. This is more to help you understand how the different parts that are in the outline that I mentioned before relate to each other here. And this is all about, again, preparing the reviewer to appreciate the significance of each part of the proposal so that they have enough context, that they have enough knowledge to understand what you're doing and why it matters here. So I've broken it down broadly for STEM disciplines and for social science disciplines for thinking about what this looks like here. But I really just want to emphasize for both of them that I think it's very important to establish the importance of what you're doing early on, starting with significance. You know, some disciplines have slightly different approaches in terms of how things are laid out. Sometimes some might start with some more background and things like that. Again, you can defer. I recommend deferring to that advice there. But I don't think it's ever a problem to make it clear early on why what you're doing matters. So, what's the larger issue? What's the problem that you're trying to address? What's the thing that we don't know in this field, and why does that matter? And that should be clear because that's going to lead into whatever your research question is, whatever the objective of the study that you're trying to do is going to look like. In the case of social sciences, that might lead to a little bit of a literature review. It might be something where you need to provide a little bit more background and context around the particular way in which you're going to be pursuing that. But ultimately, that's going to be setting up that larger research question that will, at that point, strike the reviewer hopefully as significant based on how you've posed the larger sort of context there. And that is then going to lead directly into the steps that you're actually going to be carrying out. So, the hypothesis that you're proposing, the specific aims that you're going to be carrying out, the specific steps that you're going to be following as part of this needs to be something that feels like a natural outcome of the question that you're posing, the objective that you're posing, and that objective in turn needs to be clearly related to some larger issue. And making sure that those things are clear to the reviewer before you get into the nitty-gritty details about how you're actually planning to collect data and analyze things and take measurements and whatever that's actually going to look like in your particular project. That's really what you need to be doing. So establish that significance, set the stage, show why this matters, position it in the literature, and then go about explaining what it is that you're doing and why that's the right way to approach it. So let's take some time and look at what this might look like in the context of one particular proposal. This is in the field of microbiology, and I've chosen it, and I like to use this example because I think one, I can fit it on one slide, and two, I think it does a fairly clear job of some of these features here. But again, I just want to emphasize that this is not necessarily the way you're going to write things in every single discipline that might be represented here. But take a minute to read over this, and I will highlight some features of this statement that I think speak to the things that I've been trying to emphasize in our time together this evening. Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. And again, this may not mean anything to you within your particular field, but I think a well-written proposal, even if you don't know anything from a discipline-specific context, should still give you enough structure that you can still kind of follow along with things as well. And I think this one does a good job, and that's a sign of an effective proposal. So to go back to that larger goal here, to think about what it is we're looking for an important problem. We're looking for a clear question or objective that's going to be guiding the research. We're looking for a hypothesis in most cases. Not every discipline is hypothesis driven, but a question that you're looking to demonstrate, the outcome you're looking for, and then how you're planning to do that. And I should add that I know that sometimes terminology varies a little bit in some disciplines. In some disciplines, aims and hypotheses are kind of used interchangeably, or a specific aim comes before the hypothesis there. So this is the sense in which I'm using these particular terms here, but I recognize that that's not always the exact format that's done in other places. But if we go back to the statement that we looked at some excerpts from here, we can see evidence of all these things doing that. So we'll take a look at each of those four components in turn here. So the start of this proposal here, in the first three sentences, does a good job of establishing the significance of the larger issue, of the larger purpose of the study here. So this is a research proposal. It's about honeybees, and it establishes that this is something that's really important. Key pollinators that are a key role in agriculture. However, there's a problem. Populations of honeybees have been declining significantly, and this has major implications for the economy and for the larger world and things like that. So three sentences here that help explain why, if somebody already didn't know this, or wasn't already convinced that studying the population dynamics of honeybees was important, here's a good reason. There's a problem that's going on. These populations are declining. That is probably significant in its own right, but then also there are these additional implications to that as well here. So we're setting that stage, demonstrating that there is a problem for what we can at this point assume is going to be some research that's going to hopefully shed some light on honeybee population decline. So that's been established here. What is this research actually going to be looking at? So the proposal provides a little bit of additional context here, but at the end of that of the introduction, first paragraph, we get a little more information about what's going on. And this proposal is looking at the gut microbiome of honeybees, and note that there's an issue here, that there's a question that's outstanding here, that how the gut microbiome influences health outcomes is unclear, and this is something that other scientists are working to try to understand here. Okay, so there's something that we don't know yet, but this is something that is of significance to the larger field here. Okay. So that's a little bit more specific of a claim about what we're looking at with honeybees. A little bit further in that introduction, the writer here gets even more specific, and says the contributions of the gut microbiota to host immune pathways and the mechanisms by which the host responds to gut variation has yet to be investigated. So we've gotten even more specific here. So we started big picture, honeybee populations are declining. We've moved into some different factors that could be part of that, and started focusing on the gut microbiome. And now we're focusing even more specifically on particular mechanisms of how that works here. So the research objective is sort of moving closer and closer to the specific things that the project is actually going to look at, but now you have some of that buy-in. We know that this is a significant issue. We know that one important factor has to do with the gut microbiome, and we know that there's some more specific questions related to that that are worthy of study here based on what has been proposed. And then after establishing that, that's when we get into the more specific aims here. In this case, this is a hypothesis-driven field here. And so we get the larger objective to identify possible routes of honeybee microbiotic co-diversification. And then there are two hypotheses specific to that, that are laid out here. The host genotype, diet, environmental landscape shape the functional capabilities of the honeybee microbial community, and this microbial community can acutely impact the innate immune system of adult bees, and can be modulated by the addition of probiotics. I plan to test these hypotheses with the following aims. We'll look at an aim in a little bit here, but this is a great way to kind of structure things here. So you have a larger objective that's much more specific, and two specific hypotheses here as well. This is very different than if you just started off by saying, I'm planning to investigate the role of probiotics in the gut microbiome of honeybees. That would be a purely descriptive proposal. So starting like that, doesn't give any sense about why should we be adding probiotics to honeybees and their gut microbiome, and why should we be focusing research on the gut microbiome of honeybees, and why are we focusing on honeybees specifically at all? So you don't want to just dive right in there without establishing some of that bigger picture significance, but this applicant does a good job of doing that. And again, we can see it all put together here with some of those pieces. So that's a good job of establishing that significance and moving into the more specific components of what the research is going to look like. The point that I really want to make here as we're getting near the end, when we get into the description of the research itself, the specific aims, when you're talking about the tasks that you're going to undertake to answer your questions here, is that you want to make sure that you're connecting the things that you're doing with those larger goals, with that objective. And the big point that I really want to emphasize here is that you are connecting what and why. You're not just describing what it is that you're going to be doing, you're making clear the purpose behind it. And this is something that can take place even at the level of a sentence, of a paragraph, where you're kind of explaining the larger purpose behind what you're going to do there. And in some cases, even in the span of a sentence, you might have language that explains what you're doing and why you're doing that. And in the context of doing that, this is a chance to be able to demonstrate that you are using the right methods and potentially that you're anticipating challenges and other sort of contingencies to show that you've thought through what could potentially go wrong and have a sense of how you're going to account for that. So to go back to that proposal before here, and again, the point is not that we need to spend a lot of time detailing the specifics of this research here, but after the part that we had that excerpt from before here, there was a more detailed description of the different aims. And so I've just pulled up the second aim here for us to look at there. And so the second aim is looking at functional and spatial diversity, something in the gut microbiome following immune system challenge. And here we have some of that description of what is going to be done and why it's going to be done. So in the third sentence, we have sort of the larger purpose, the why behind what's going to be done with this aim here. Determine if altering the microbial community with probiotics can modulate the immune response of the bees and reduce fatalities due to a particular parasite. So that's sort of the why behind this comparative analysis and spatial diversity within the gut microbiome here. And then we get into some more specific things that are actually going to be done. So in red, we have like the actual tasks that are going to happen here. So microbiome samples are harvested from the midgut and hindgut of single bees. Shotgun metagenomics will be performed. Functional pathways will be identified in each group and quantitatively compared. mRNA sequence will be completed. So that's the what of what's happening here. But note that it's not just a list of these particular tasks, but that the writer also includes explanation for what the purpose of that is. The second parts of those sentences that start in red that I have highlighted in light blue here. So shotgun metagenomics will be performed to compare strain-level functional diversity between experimental groups and gut regions and determine impact of probiotic strains of composition and functional diversity. So there's that language that explains why you're doing this here. And the same thing with the other parts of this as well. And then also there's a interesting sentence that I've highlighted in purple in the middle of this that helps provide a little bit of justification for this and references some pilot data already. It says, I've done some previous research that confirmed that our methods are sensitive enough to detect distinct spatial microbial compositions consistent with the literature. So that's a really great sentence to drop in for this particular applicant, because if a reviewer is wondering, okay, well, you want to do these things, but will that method actually be sensitive enough to detect what it is that you're looking for here? And they're saying, we've already done some preliminary work and the findings are strong and it's consistent with what we're finding in established literature here as well. So this is an example of connecting that what and why piece here. It's not just we're going to do this comparative analysis, we're going to harvest these particular samples, we're going to do this particular sequencing. All along with those descriptions of the specific things that are going to be done is explanatory language that explains the why behind it. In order to do this, to result in this, in order to quantify this. So all of that really helps build that case with the specific details there. So when it comes down to after establishing that initial significance and narrowing it down to your particular objective there, even when you're describing the more granular steps of what that research might look like, you still want to be giving attention to explaining why you're doing the things that you're doing, both in terms of showing that they're the right methods, and showing that you understand what it is that you expect to get out of doing that particular research here. And just to show some of the things that reviewers noted with this particular proposal here, they thought that the study was well focused, and they noted that the applicant had secured access to a lab to continue the study. So this was actually work that was going to be expanding upon work that they had previously done in an earlier stage of their education. So that feasibility piece, that's something a reviewer paid attention to. Um, uh, Another comment noted that it was clearly outlined for how aims will be accomplished and how results will be disseminated there. Great. So again, that clear outlining, wanting to know what the steps are going to be there. And then, you know, the additional last comment there has notes that how this research relates, and some of the feasibility pieces here. And it still notes that there are some things that could have been improved a little bit as well. Notes that there was a lack of discussion of potential results or alternatives if an aim fails. So again, even in proposals that get funded, reviewers will often note areas for potential improvement. So even if you look at examples of successful proposals, that doesn't mean that they are above critique. There's still things that could have been done better. And again, I just highlight this here so that you can see that these are things that reviewers look for sometimes. They want to know, what do you think the potential results are going to be? They want to know, have you considered contingencies or alternatives if something doesn't go according to plan? So it's not just me telling you this. These are things that actual reviewers have noted in their comments on proposals, even successful proposals. All right, so we are at the end of our time here. I know that we've covered a lot of ground here, but I'm happy to answer questions, and I will go ahead and stop sharing for a moment and stop the recording and give you a chance to ask questions that you might have about anything that we've covered so far.